Today I'm talking to Val King. Val's got a fascinating background. She was MD of the Ruth Flight Company here in the Cotswolds, and as part of that role, she recently has exited that business using an EOT, and now she, because of that experience, that really positive experience, she now runs a business working with other businesses to see if an EOT is right for them. So welcome, Val. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Morning, Daryl. It's a beautiful day, even though I've got my door closed now. But I think we've both got bird problems with bird noises outside.
Yeah, there's worse problems to have, isn't there? You could have the beach noise crashing.
Well, yeah. Now you're talking.
Hey, Val, look, thanks for joining us. Why don't you start by giving us a bit of a background and your experience, and we'll dig in from there.
Okay, so I started my working life in the corporate world. I studied languages and then did a postgrad in international marketing. So I worked in a really interesting field in healthcare as well as glass fiber. But then there came a point when I was getting a bit fed up with traveling so much, to be frank. I was traveling sometimes up to three weeks out of 4, and so it was getting a bit too tiring, and that was even before the security problems at airports. My husband had started up a business. He's an architect, and he had spotted a gap in the market. He was an architect working in Hampstead Garden suburb, had started to design a product called the Conservation Roof Light, which is a replica of the old cast iron roof light. And this was for mainly residential projects, but also other historic buildings, for roof windows where the local historic building officer or the planning officer would not allow a modern roof light like a Velux. So he started the business from scratch, and then I joined him about 2 years later. And so we ended up with 70 employees and working out of 2 places in the Cotswolds. And I have to say that what I was able to take the good stuff from the corporate world, knowing things like budgets were important and appraisals and some of the processes from the corporate world, but also relinquishing the bad stuff, like the too long meetings where nothing got done, a lot of time spent on forecasting that never really bore fruit. So I was able to get rid of all the bad stuff and import the good stuff from what I learned in the corporate world.
Yeah, I think that it's an important point you've raised around, I think we can overlook the corporate world as being bureaucratic and slow. But there's a whole lot of disciplines that I think if we're in the corporate world, we just take for granted, that are really beneficial to SMEs and growing mid-market businesses. Especially if they haven't seen them before. So we can bring those disciplines in, and they really add value. And some of them are new to business owners if they haven't had that experience.
Yeah, I think it's important to bring the processes into business especially once it gets to a certain size.
Yeah. So what were the things you brought in? I think you mentioned forecasting, getting the right level of forecasting, running some discipline around running meetings.
That's right, yeah. And what I also brought in was trusted advisors, because if you're in an SME, or especially when you're small, it's quite easy to become myopic. And I saw the real benefit of bringing in outside thinking. So I spent quite a lot of money over the years on bringing in really good people. I met a lot of these people at a business leaders group I attended called MD2MD, and it was really beneficial to me to bring in people like a lady called Lindsay McKenzie on project management. We do a lot of projects in the Roof Light Company, so it was a very structured approach to project management. Things like coaching, a really excellent coach called Gareth Chick, where everyone in the company got the benefit of knowing what coaching meant, both from the point of view of giving coaching and receiving coaching. Things like disciplines around marketing planning and strategic planning. So a lot of those things I brought in over the years, knowing that I didn't have the expertise, and there are certainly people who could do it better than me, but bringing in that expertise, but making it stick, that was really important. Making those new processes stick in the business, not just someone coming in, that was very interesting, and then doing nothing with them. I was very assiduous in terms of applying what we learned, and then making sure that others in the business did the same.
So developing new habits and making sure they stick.
Exactly.
And the things you described, if I'm picking up correctly, there's a combination of, I guess, looking after the people through coaching and developing the people, and also on the other hand, getting that balance right with developing the processes and the systems and making sure that the people are being as productive and as effective as they can be.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I think that businesses get to say. In fact, I listened to a previous podcast you did, and I think when you get to about 20, 25, the centrifugal forces start to spin out of control unless you actually bring in processes. And a lot of people, and in fact, in my case, I was thinking, really, do we need all these processes? But you really do. Otherwise, people just don't know what to do. When you're all sitting in a room together, and everyone kind of knows what's going on, and it's great. That's that 1G company, generation one, when it's all exciting. When you get into the second generation phase to about 20 people, it's really important to start thinking about processes. And if you can't do it, you bring someone in to help you do it.
Yeah, and that gives you consistency, and that makes your life easier as running the business.
Yes, of course. And you know, it's sometimes you sort of do it against your will because it feels less natural, and people go, oh, come on, you know, I've got to fill in another piece of paper. Is this really what I want to do? But you do go out of control. And I've seen it in quite a few businesses where they lose control and they get more and more stressed, and the owner starts to get more unhappy with the lack of control and doesn't know how to take control again. And yeah, it's just something you have to face up to when you start growing.
So you said you joined your husband's business effectively and helped him in running it. How did you decide what roles each of you would take in the business?
Well, that was actually quite easy because Pete is an architect. And so when I used to say to him things like budgets, he just used to go, budgets? I'm not going to go do budgets. So Pete was a very creative person, and it didn't take him long to decide that he really wanted to go back to architecture. So he, for a while, I was looking after HR and marketing, and then he really just wanted to go back to being an architect again. And then coming in only for the new design products and projects that were exciting him. So he came in to do discrete projects, but not to actually run the business. So that's when I took over as managing director.
So
you
were MD in the business?
Yes, so I was managing director from about, I don't know, late 90s, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and in fact, you know, I still remember the time when Pete wanted me to be MD. Our accountant said I should do, my father-in-law said I should do, and I never heard of an MD who was part-time. And I just had 2 small children, and I didn't want to work full-time. And I'd honestly never heard of it. I thought, I might as well give it a go. So that's what I did. I just decided, okay, I can probably do this in a part-time role, and that really helped me to delegate in those early days because I had no choice. I had to delegate a lot more. So that helped me to get my head around empowering people and then just trusting people. And if people got it wrong, then we held them accountable and learned from the lesson. Okay. So it was a good learning experience, and I think it helped me not to become, in some SMEs, the MD becomes the point of contact for everything, for every decision, the spider in the web, so to speak, and in the middle of the web. And I think that because of circumstances, and it's probably part of my nature as well, I just found it easier to delegate and make sure that people did their jobs right. So it was out of necessity as well.
Yeah. So how would you describe your leadership style and the culture that you created in the business?
So I feel very strongly about our values-led culture. I took some time out of the business. I wanted to do something else. I worked in the charity sector for a while and then came back, and I had set up some values, but it was clear that those values were not meaningful in any way. They didn't affect behaviour, they were just words on a wall. And I'm sure that most people have seen this in other organisations where the values simply do not mean anything. So I brought in a culture of values being at the base and leading what we do. And so I did that in different ways, bringing in behaviours, again, bringing in an organisational development consultant called Kate Mercer, and she helped us to form the behaviours around each of the values. We had nominations for people who displayed the values, and they became the values team. We made sure that we had the values at the heart of every decision that we took. And it was easier actually having those behaviours. They were on the wall. But whenever we were in a leadership meeting and we had a tough old decision to make, things like the value of care really helped to resonate. And I can just remember one of the behaviours is we show active interest in others' well-being with respect and compassion. So that's if we were thinking that we were doing something that wasn't showing that, then we held each other accountable. And that's and so I genuinely feel that in the business of, say, 70 people in a manufacturing business with a lot of blokey blokes working away there, the values meant to enough of the people, enough of the time to make a difference. And people who came and visited the company really saw that. They saw that we were quite a bit different from most companies that they would normally see. And that's particularly in the manufacturing area.
Okay, so you were quite serious about your values, and they were more than just rhetoric and corporate slogans and for the corporate literature. You've followed through, and I think you even mentioned held people accountable to behaviours linked to values. Brilliant.
Yeah, okay. and we have that as part of our one-to-ones. We have monthly one-to-ones with everyone, and we use the values. So it actually helps as well when it's easy to hold somebody accountable when it's just numbers, when it's a sales target or on-time delivery or right first time. It's easy to hold people accountable when it's a numbers-based matrix. However, it's harder to hold people accountable on behaviour. You can't just walk into a one-to-one and say, I don't like the way you said that. I mean, you can say that, but it is quite a tough conversation. Whereas if you have a framework of behaviours, you can actually use them to start the conversation and hold people accountable for their behaviour is much more easy when you have that framework.
Okay. So you've got a culture in the organisation where it's out front, it's deliberate, it's conscious, you're leading through values, you've got systems and structures set up in the business. It now comes to the time where you're starting to think, hey, look, what's next in my journey? What went through your head? You know, how did this conversation, this thinking start? You know, tell us a bit about that.
So it was really an elimination of the options that we had. So I looked at the possibility of an MBO. The problem with an MBO is that I'd heard a lot of anecdotes about how it didn't really work very well because the bank or the private equity funder put the new team under a lot of pressure. There was also the fact that the guys hadn't actually approached us. They hadn't approached me. So I was wondering, well, what appetite do they have? Would that be possible? If I dangled the cherry in front of them, might they just take it and then maybe regret it? But I also knew there was this problem with the actual pressure that the PE, so the funders put on the new top team. And that would change the culture. And then at the end, somebody wants to make a lot of money out of an MBO, whether it's managers or the PE. And that tends to, when people need or want to make a lot of money, then that tends to change the long-term sustainability of a company. Actions have to be taken to do things in the short term, and that's not one of our values. So that was a no-no. We were approached by another competitor, who was a kind of Me Too Velux company, and they were really interested in buying us because we have a very good franchise with architects and they didn't. But I decided that actually that made it quite easy just to say no, because I thought, well, they had production in Poland, and I knew that most people would lose their job. At the end of the day, that's what would have happened, even if they promised lots of things. So it made it quite easy to then think, well, what's the best option? And that was an employee ownership trust, where we sold 60% of the shares in the end to a trust that's set up as a new entity. And then we decide who the trustees are. We decide what the deal is. We decide on the pace of the deal. And in fact, I was reflecting this with our FD who ran the project, well, who ran the financial side of the project. He was saying that actually you're much more in control when you're doing an employee ownership deal compared to others. Because at the end of when the time comes when you're starting to arm wrestle each other into negotiating position, it's actually quite unpredictable what's going to happen. you might have your valuation, which is fair enough, but then they'll be looking at some of the ways they can rebate from the total valuation. And then there'll be some last minute earnout negotiations, whereas with an employee ownership trust, get the valuation, which is independently done, and then you know where you stand. And so it was a lot more, I felt a lot more in control.
Okay, so you're in control of the process. You're on the front foot. I think you indicated that you're basically working with friendly buyers, the right sort of people with you, and there's not going to be any surprises at the end or any tricky bits through whatever behavioural, even negotiation tactics, shall we say?
Yeah.
So you're always on the front foot. It's not adversarial. And there's also a sense of legacy there as well, by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
You're looking after the people who've helped you build the business into what it is today.
Yes, so the protection of the people is very important. And when we told them about the employee ownership trust, we had to do this in a very clear way to communicate why we were doing it. So I basically went through the options with them, just as I've done. But the important thing for me was the legacy of our values-led culture. The second aspect of our legacy was innovation. Pete started by actually copying a product, but at the same time innovating the way that it was designed, so that it was a modern properties for a product that looked like the old cast iron fight. So innovation has been something we've always had with the company, with bringing in new products all the time, new processes, new ways of doing things. So innovation was part of our legacy. And then the final part was long-term sustainability. So that's always looking at the long-term interests of the business, not just the quick buck. And then also from an environmental point of view, we want to make sure that we're doing the least damage to the planet. And as a manufacturing company, that's not easy to do, but that's a project that's actually started about 2 years ago.
Yeah. So you already knew that everyone was aligned to your driving force for the business purpose, if you like, your vision.
Exactly.
So you knew that the new owners were aligned to that cause and would continue with that and set out with what the founders had set out to achieve.
Exactly. And I think the difference with an employee ownership trust is you put 6 trustees, in our case 6. You don't have to have 6. You can have all sorts of different forms of trustee membership. We decided on 3 independent trustees. One of whom was selected by the other directors, and then 2 co-owner trustees, so 2 people who actually work in the business, and then myself as the founder. So while I was managing director, Pete was the founder trustee, and now I'm on the board of trustees. So it's the job of the board of trustees to hold the top team, the leadership team, or the board of directors accountable for the guiding principles and the best interests of the business. So that's what we do as a board of trustees. And it's quite odd. I had a meeting yesterday in board of trustees, and it is odd to have to be on the other side of the table. It really is quite strange. But I'm very careful not to give Steve a hard time unless I really think it's necessary. But I remember that difference, though, that difference presenting for the first time to others about what had been mine and Pete's business, and it was a big emotional jump. It was harder than I thought, actually, but now it feels easier. But it was a hard jump to go from knowing that you had basically control over the whole thing, then relinquishing that control. It is a bit of an emotional leap.
Absolutely. And so your role changed. It's all poacher come gamekeeper, if you like, from running the company.
Yeah.
Total holding people account. So you've implemented. You're now on the other side. You've now exited the business. You've gone through the whole journey of bringing the employees up to speed and introducing the concept of the EOT, and then working through that process. Now that you're on the other side, what do you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of the process?
What I know now is actually I'm a lot happier than I thought I'd be. And I think in a way COVID-19 has helped that, in that I don't have all the strain and the worry that I used to have. You know, that is a big burden that I no longer have. And so I feel good about what we've done. I think that it's all along the project of selling the business. I knew it was the right thing to do, and I think that for exiting business owners, I was just reading something that's, you know, start with the end in mind, and he says to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. Now, a clear understanding of your destination when you're exiting a business is such a hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. And for many exiting business owners, they don't even want to do to know what is going at what's going to happen at the other side of the process. But I had an idea that I wanted to set up this new business, BFG Associates, but I didn't know what it was going to feel like. I really didn't. But I was very lucky. And I was very lucky because everybody's world changed in March. Everybody. In fact, you could say globally, everything changed. Yeah. And I knew my life was going to change. My world was going to change. I was going to stop being managing director in March. And it kind of helped having this feeling that everybody's changed. Everybody's life has changed. So I didn't know that. Nobody knew that was going to happen. So it is, when Stephen Covey says something like start with the end in mind, you kind of know roughly, but you don't really know. You'll never know exactly how that is. But I think that what was important to me was knowing I did the project well. I actually did I led the transition project as well as I could, and it was the right thing to do. And I think that anyone who's looking at what they want to do, how they want to sell their business, needs to think about how might they feel at the end of the process. What would be a good decision? Because the last thing that anybody wants, especially with a big decision like this, possibly the biggest decision that you're ever going to make in your life in the business sense, is you don't want to make a decision that you'll regret. So making sure that you go through the due diligence of what is really important to you. And I think speaking to guys like you at Succession Plus to help to go through the emotions as well as the practicalities of the exit is really important and not to be underestimated, because it's a huge thing to do. And so I was glad that it went the way it did. Everything worked out fine, but at the same time, I wish I'd kind of known. I wish I'd known it was going to be as good as this in a way, because I still kept thinking, "Oh God, what am I going to do? You know, I'm going to be home with Pete the whole time. It's going to kill me." But in the end, it's worked out really well. So I wish I'd kind of known that, you
know. So knowing that it'll be okay.
Knowing that it'll be okay, and the thing is, I think that's it. But back to, and I know that this, you know, I'm leaning against an open door here with you guys, and thinking it through, thinking about what you really want. You know, is it all about money? Is it really all about money? You know, in which case, you know, that you might go down one route. But then you might think, well, what do I want to do with this business? What is my legacy? And if I've heard quite a few stories where people do regret just selling to the highest bidder, and you know, and then the whole company dismantling, and that is a big regret. So, yeah. But you know, everybody is different. Everybody's business is different. What drives them is different. But thinking about what you might feel like after it's all over is important.
And what you're describing now is, I think, the dilemma that every business owner goes through, and that is, how do I get the balance right between maximizing the business value and money in my pocket, as you mentioned, and leaving that legacy? How do I get that balance right? Because, you know, I've built this up, it represents my life's work and everything I've created over my lifetime, and it's valuable, it's important that this lives on. So how do I get that balance? But at the same time, I need money in my pocket to fund my next phase after work, whatever that looks like. So yeah. It's a tough one. So I think you've led us on nicely to the issues around timing. When is the right time to actually step out? You mentioned you got a nudge, but what advice can you give other business owners around timing and or time frame?
I think, well, I think every consultant would say, and everyone involved in Exton would say as early as possible, so that you can get the succession planning sorted. That's really important. And in my case, there was one guy who I knew was a really good contender for the job, but I wasn't absolutely sure whether he was ready for the job or right for the job. He'd always worked in the company, went from a young man. So, and we were looking at doing international marketing to Europe. And I thought perhaps the new MD, it would be better if they had a broader experience of international market as well as a broader experience of manufacturing. But what I did do was to develop Steve as if he was going to become MD. That's what I decided to do. And then if it didn't work out, then if he left because he was dissatisfied, then I just had to pay, the company had to pay that price. He was ops director. In the end, he got the job, but we did actually recruit externally. So succession planning is really important, and making sure you've got a really good, strong leadership team. And that comes about with letting them make decisions without you completely influencing what they think and say. And that's something that I learned in the last couple of years. So it's important to do that.
Yeah, so it's a bit of trusting your judgment and backing yourself and just acting as if and doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And there are some things you just can't control.
No, there's things you can't control, but one thing you can control when you do an EOT is you can stay in the business as long as you like. You know, you can sell it to an employee ownership trust, and I was MD for a year afterwards, and I was thinking I'd be there for a maximum of 2 years. So you can stay as MD as long as you like. You can also become chair of the business if you want to. So it does give you a lot more flexibility if you don't want to let go entirely. You can stay as MD for another 5 years if you want to. Some people stay on, some people don't. One thing I was determined not to do was to interfere. I was, even before lockdown, obviously I've not been able to go into the business very often in the last few weeks or months, but I was determined not to go in and just and meddle. And I needed to let Steve get our new MD have that space to work and make his own mark in the business. Because I've heard a lot of times where there's a lot of meddling and confusion because the old guard doesn't leave, basically.
Yeah.
And it's important to avoid confusion. I hate muddles. And if people were thinking, oh, Val's here, you know, is she involved in this meeting, and why is she here? And you know, is Steve still reporting to her? So I was absolutely determined for that not to happen.
Yeah, it's
important.
It's important for business owners to be aware just their mere presence has an influence on the way people behave Absolutely. In the business. Yeah. Rightly or wrongly, one way or another, they have an influence because of their role and their heritage. So you've been running around the market now, helping others with you know, considering if an EOT is right for them. What have you learned? What mistakes do business owners make when considering it? What do they miss? What are the key ingredients, if you like? So thinking of some final tips.
Well, a couple of things. I think there was one firm of architects I was speaking to where they just didn't have the structure right. They weren't even ready to sell, but what they needed was organizational development or someone to come in and help them with their structure. And I think that was that's quite important as well. But before you even start, again, it's the succession planning piece. It's important to think what kind of team do we need, and thinking about the roles in the team as opposed to the people, because a lot of small businesses that emerge with a lot of people doing different things, which are maybe not in the best interests of the business. So it's important to define the roles that you need and set up the accountabilities and success measures associated with that role. And that was something we did in the Rooflight company. We needed to make sure who is the boss of this particular area and what is he or she accountable for. So that's a really important lesson that I've learned that is not being done in quite a few SMEs, where there's a lack of clarity of the role definition. And also I've heard a couple of stories of, and I think this is, I've met a couple of people where there's a bit of a bun fight for the role of MD, and sometimes the clarity, what is required is clarity of what that role means. And sometimes it might be that the person who thinks they want the top job, once they see the role, they might not want it. And they think that it's the only progression up, whereas it might not make them happy. And I think, again, it's this clarity of definition of who is doing what and who is accountable for what. Yeah. And once you've got that in place, then you can decide, well, maybe you just need somebody from outside. So those are it's the clarity and definition of the roles within the business, especially at senior levels.
Yeah,
it's really important.
Who's responsible for what and when and where and how, and absolute clarity about that.
And how are you measuring them? How are you measuring them? What are the success measures?
Yep, good point. Okay, that's great advice, Val. Yeah, getting your house in order and the structure, and what I think you're describing is getting. If you had all those things in place, the business would be exit ready, or exit,
exactly.
And then whether you do or don't exit, it's up to you. But the business is
absolutely, yeah, and you're in control of the timing. You decide. And I think it's, if you're starting to feel a bit wobbly about leaving, then sometimes it's good to just talk it through with your family as well. Because maybe you're more stressed than you think you are, and maybe you're having a detrimental effect on the family if you are. So and I have to say that it just makes life a lot freer when you don't have that burden. It's a bit of a golden cage sometimes. You talk yourself into thinking, this is me, I'm defined by this, and there's life afterwards. Yeah, that's been my experience.
What's next? What's that next part of my journey as a business owner? This role has defined me and what I've done for so many years. What's next for me? If I know what I'm moving to, then that'll help me to make that next step towards it, and probably make it a whole lot easier for everyone else who's left behind. Because I heard a definition recently that said legacy is defined by the leadership team that's left behind.
Yeah. Yes, that's really good. I've not heard that one.
It rings true, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Legacy is defined by the leadership left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. That is a good one. I must admit, I'll write that down.
Recorded now. You'll be able to.
Of course, that's right. Forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah, I think in fact one of our advisors for the employee ownership transition kept on talking about our successor, and he was with John Lewis for 30 years. And in 1929, John Speed Lewis set up the principles of the John Lewis Partnership. And I've written the first principle down. This is still used today since 1929. The first principle is the partnerships, this is the John Lewis Partnership's ultimate purpose is the happiness of all of its members through their worthwhile and satisfying employment in a successful business. So that is what John Lewis is all about. And unlike Fraser's, unlike Debenhams, they're not the ones going to the wall. They're suffering quite a lot, obviously, and particularly now. But because they have those principles, and a lot of success is because of the additional work they do in staff engagement in a meaningful way. We all talk about staff engagement and how important it is, but they actually have an employee council that actually helps to run the business. So the John Lewis Partnership is obviously they're in the high altar of employee ownership in the EO world, but they do what they do is they walk the talk, and that is important. And you can sense that when you speak to a lot of waiters and John Lewis people.
They're not just saying people are our most important asset, they're actually doing something about it, and as you say, walking the talk. So look after your people and they'll look after you.
Yeah.
It's often said, but hard to put in practice for many people.
It's not easy, and believe me, in our business, there's so many times when I've been so disappointed by people's behaviour. Trying to do everything to get people on board and treat them well with respect, and then they kind of give you a bit of a kick in the teeth. And you just got to accept that there are always going to be exceptions. You're never going to get everybody behaving beautifully. It's just that that world doesn't exist. But then just getting over it and just saying, that was just not concentrating on the negative aspects of people's behavior.
It's the joy of working with humans.
Really, yeah. And I wouldn't enjoy a world working with machines. It wouldn't be my thing.
So you've been through the EOT. Is it something you'd recommend?
Absolutely, I would. I think that I started up this business as a Force for Good Associates, BFG Associates, and I believe business can be a force for good. And nobody sets up a business thinking this is going to be a rubbish business with a horrible culture, but sometimes they end up with something very mediocre. And I think that employee ownership is one of the best models available, the best ownership models available once you get into it to make business better for the people working in the business. And if you can get people who really would come to work thinking, I'm actually part of something a bit different, a bit special, and this is part of what I do and part of my life, then you get people who are happier and it's better for society. And if we all as business leaders, if we all work towards helping people to be happy and more fulfilled, then the world will be a better place. And it does sound a bit cuckoo land, but it really, in practice, it does. I saw it work in our business. It definitely did, and people were more fulfilled, and it runs into their family life. If you've got a rubbish boss who doesn't recognise you and who is always who really treats you badly, you're going to go home and take that home to the kids and the wife, or the husband and your partner. So I think it's really important it's a responsibility as business leaders to do that. And yeah, I think employee ownership can really help to make that happen.
Cool. So any final tips? So there's an interesting timing.
Yes, any final tips? Final tips would be the Employee Ownership Association, and you can see that up here, it's Employee Ownership Day is a really good source of information. I've seen your website, Daryl. There's a lot of really good website content there for people who want to explore different options, because it might not be for everyone. Just think of all the options and looking at what is right for you. I think it's spending that time on the preparation to make sure what's right for you if you're exiting your business.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing your time with us for today, Val. I've really enjoyed getting an insight, and we'll look forward to catching up with you soon. Cheers.
Thank you. And in real life, Daryl, maybe we'll have coffee.